Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 3:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up today, Daniel Turner from Power of the Future joins us at 3:30. We'll look back at the life of the man who lived to 100, the former president Jimmy Carter passing away this weekend. Daniel Turner weighs in on his legacy. That's at 3:30. 4 o'clock, Joe Concha is here from Fox News, the author of Progressively Worse. We'll talk to him about the media and how they have some regrets as the year closes out, and they involve allowing Donald Trump to be reelected. They thought they could stop it. If only we had changed our plans. John Lott will also be with us today from the Crime Prevention Research Center. That's at 5 o'clock. We talked to him about the cost savings that comes with deporting illegal aliens from the United States. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. One of the worst federal officials to ever serve in the United States of America, I can't even call it serve, to abuse his power in the United States of America, has just announced that he is resigning effective January 16th. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, a man called Matthew Graves, who we spent quite a bit of time on this program talking about, but boy, he really deserved a much higher profile across the American news media for the vile behavior coming out of his office, the gross abuse of power and the abandonment of the district that he was supposed to serve, Washington, D.C. Matthew Graves announcing today, just within the last hour, that he is resigning as United States Attorney for the District of Columbia effective January 16th, after the Justice Department says he served in the role for more than 3 years. More than 3 years. Now, you'll notice more than 3 years puts him in there dating back to 2021. And yes, since then, he's been persecuting the American citizens who went into the United States Capitol building, stood outside the United States Capitol building, weren't even in the United States Capitol on January 6th of 2021. In fact, the Justice Department today brags about the role that Graves played in destroying the lives of all of these people. They brag about it under a section header on their press release today, defending democracy. Defending democracy is what they say. And they say that January 6th led to the, quote, largest investigation in DOJ history, the largest in the history of the United States Justice Department. No such investigation of that scale done, by the way, for any of the Antifa rioting, Black Lives Matter destruction, billions of dollars in damage, dozens of lives lost, homicides all across the country. Nothing like that. The United States Department of Justice launched its biggest investigation in American history to destroy the lives of thousands of American citizens. To date, they brag today, roughly 1,600 people have been charged in connection with the attack, with almost 1,100 having already been sentenced for their conduct. There have been over 170 contested trials with the United States, prevailing in more than 99% of them, they go on. And they say these convictions include the first seditious conspiracy convictions since the trial stemming from the first bombing of the World Trade Center in the 1990s, because politically motivated violence and destruction rip at the fabric of our society. Mr. Graves made federally prosecuting such crimes a priority, he said. A priority. Yes, he did. Do you know what he deprioritized as he made prosecuting American citizens a priority? Well, he declined to prosecute upwards of 70% of the people who were arrested in the District of Columbia for committing awful crimes in our nation's capital. 67%. Flashing back to March of 2023, the Washington Post even running with the headline, D.C. U.S. Attorney declined to prosecute 67% of those arrested. Here's why, they say. And then they make all sorts of excuses for why he wasn't able to prosecute everybody. I can't. He's just too busy. As the district grapples with rising crime and increasing attention from federal lawmakers over public safety issues, a startling statistic emerged in recent weeks. Last year, federal prosecutors in the district U.S. Attorney's office chose not to prosecute 67% of those arrested by police officers in cases that would have been tried in D.C. Superior Court. That's a near doubling from 2015 when prosecutors, that was when the Obama era, when prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office declined to prosecute 35% of such cases. That was in the Obama era. So 67%. And here's just to remind you about the role of the D.C. U.S. Attorney. Unlike U.S. attorneys from everywhere else in the country, the D.C. U.S. Attorney handles the prosecution of local criminals. That's one of the unique natures of the D.C. U.S. Attorney. And he wasn't going after the people who were making your life a living hell. Instead, he was going after protesters, people who were concerned about the results of the 2020 election and who were expressing it, albeit incorrectly in many cases. But regardless, was the punishment, is the misery commensurate with the event? The answer to that is no, not at all, especially if you compare it against everything else they're not prosecuting, especially if you compare it to the Antifa BLM rioting. It's also crazy. And also, this is one more middle finger accelerated into the air in the final days of the Biden administration. Because is Matthew Graves going to stay in that role? Would he have stayed in that role when Donald Trump arrived? No. President Trump would fire him. The same is true of Christopher Wray, who has also announced his resignation ahead of President Trump's arrival. And this is ahead of President Trump bringing pardons on January 20th for J6 detainees. The United States Department of Justice wants to send one more message to him at least. And they're going to keep doing this, but yet another message like this designed to say, screw you. We're proud of hurting you and your supporters. That's what they're saying. One other thing about Matthew Graves' tenure in D.C., as we're processing the breaking news that Graves is resigning. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia will be resigning effective January 16th. D.C. homicides reached quarter-century highs under Matt Graves. This hadn't been some sort of big success, his time in office. This has been abysmal failure. Crime has been out of control, and it's gone unprosecuted. There have not been serious consequences, and when you fail to deliver consequences, you encourage the very behavior that you would otherwise hope to deter. So homicides in the District of Columbia, this is once again, according to the Washington Post's own data, reached a quarter-century high in 2023. Now, who had been U.S. Attorney for over 2 years by that point? Matthew Graves. That made it the fifth highest murder rate among all of America's biggest cities. The fifth highest. And then the Washington Post said, well, the pace has slowed a bit this year. That was as of December 4th. But that's the opposite of some sort of amazing record. And yet the United States Department of Justice today releases an entire statement bragging about how amazing he is and what a great job he's done. He's targeted violent offenders. He's reduced gun and drug-related violence. He addressed, challenges with the criminal justice ecosystem. Sure. Defending democracy, they brag. So this is a guy whose departure from the federal government is long overdue. Long overdue. And again, a lesser known name, but one of the most consequential figures inside of the United States federal government. He was a hatchet man on behalf of Joe Biden and company. His job was to hurt Joe Biden's political opponents, to demonize people who support Trump in the first place, and to try and scare you away from expressing that view in public in the lead up to the 2024 election. And I thank the good Lord that it didn't work. I really do. I am so grateful that Americans rejected these fear tactics, these fear campaigns, and said, you can't intimidate me. I don't believe you. I don't trust you. I don't care how many fake intel officials you come bring out and claim something is true and we know it's not true. I don't care which of your media outlets insist to me that I'm the bad guy when I know it's you. I don't care. I don't care. So all of these people, isn't it amazing? It's like the left is still reeling. They have no idea what happened. How did this happen? How did we lose? It's because these institutions don't have any trust. And that lack of trust is very well deserved. Whether it's the American news media, the legacy press, it really is the establishment press. There are new media outlets that fit the same ideological genre. It's the establishment press. It exists to defend the establishment. People don't trust it. They've completely devalued their currency. U.S. attorneys, the United States Department of Justice, the United States intelligence community, the Pentagon. How many agencies? The Department of Education, the Department of Energy. I could literally just list off every department of the federal government. We'd be here for hours. And all of these institutions lack trust because they squandered it away. They squandered it away. And so the American people gave them the leader they deserve, Trump. You get Trump now. Way to go. You did this to yourself. We're sending Trump. We're sending him back. And Matthew Graves ducking out just ahead of Trump's arrival, trying to hold on to some shred of credibility in this ridiculous statement they put out today, bragging about something that should have never been the case. The largest exertion of resources in the United States Department of Justice's entire history was on January 6th. Way to go, everybody. Chris is in Marshall on line 1. Hello, Chris. You are on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Nothing infuriates me more than this hypocrisy, Vince. I pray that we have secured his passport. I pray that every one of these convicted January 6ers are exonerated while Trump is on the podium, and I hope they all die extremely wealthy. This is an absolute travesty in the hypocrisy. I hope there are a lot of Democrats that are legitimately scared. They reached out to me. The D.C. Attorney General office called me about a case that I was loosely affiliated with 10 years ago. And they said, hey, would you mind coming in and having a talk? We want to pick your brain about. And my reply was, if you want to have a talk, hop on 66, come out to Old Salem and Marshall and buy me a cup of coffee. But if you think this tow-headed Virginia boy is going to elect to cross the river and step into your office when you've got political prisoners in solitary with no due process, not a chance. I will be in D.C. on the 6th, and I'll be back there on the 20th. I haven't been across that river since 2021.
Wow. Well, you're coming back now. And what's bringing you back to the district?
I am coming back now. I am going to, even if I just stand in the middle of the mall with my phone and watch the events play out on social media, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to reclaim that piece of real estate. This is an absolute travesty, and I hope they pay. I hope. Here's the deal. I got a deal for these people. We're going to be really generous. You want to see magnanimity? We're going to be 80% as lawfare and 80% as petty and 80% as retributive as they've been. We're going to give them a 20% discount. Congratulations. Merry Christmas.
Chris, I
your
love
bags and say goodbye to your sweethearts.
There's Chris Marshall. Chris in Marshall. His last name's not Marshall, but he is in Marshall. Chris, thank you very much. Good to talk to you today.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Hey, on this subject, I've got more for you, including Julie Kelly. The breaking news is she will join us now at 5:30. She is one of the students of the Matthew Graves tenure. She's been studying him closely. She's horrified by what she's seen. She'll share that at 5:30 coming up. As I said, Julie Kelly is going to join us at 5:30. She'll react to the news today, breaking just in the last hour, that U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves is resigning his post. He'll be leaving just 4 days before President Trump arrives back at the White House. And today, she shares this clip of Matthew Graves. Take a listen. This is an older clip from the past few years where Graves announces that federal law enforcement officials are now going to go after people who were standing on the grass outside of the Capitol building. This is so rather than prosecute actual violent crime in the District of Columbia, he's going after grass standers. Listen to this.
And what happened inside of the building? An important note when it comes to our prosecutions about those who remained outside the building. We have used our prosecutorial discretion to primarily focus on those who entered the building or those who engaged in violent or corrupt conduct on Capitol grounds. But if a person knowingly entered the restricted area without authorization, they had already committed a federal crime. Make no mistake, thousands of people occupied an area that they were not authorized to be present in the first place.
Yeah, there he is, going after the people standing on the grass. This is like, it's like ripping the tag off your mattress, a gross crime, and you need to be prosecuted for that. Let's see here. I've got Dennis calling in from Manassas now on line one. Hello, Dennis. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Thank you. You were talking about Matt Graves resigning, and you can't talk about that man without bringing up the name Matthew Perna, who committed suicide, mainly because Graves made it his mission to go after people that their only crime was they entered the Capitol building. Perna didn't destroy anything, didn't assault anybody. His only crime was he was in the Capitol building for about 15 minutes. And Perna threatened him with like 20 years in jail, and I think it was like a $200,000 fine. And Perna couldn't afford that, and he didn't want to burden his family. So in the end, they pursued him for about a year, delaying court trials, this, that, and the other. And in the end, he just killed himself.
And in his story, they also announced that they were going to go after him with a terrorism enhancement in his charges. Which apparently, according to his family, was the precursor to his suicide. Just an awful thing. And January 6th footage came out of Matthew Perna in the Capitol. And to your point, Dennis, he was walking around in a red MAGA hoodie. I think he had his phone up. He was just sort of calmly walking around, and there's nobody even there's no interaction with cops or anything going on. He's just walking around inside the Capitol building. And Matthew Graves and the tyrants in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office drove him and others to suicide. That has actually happened in this case, which is just one of the many tragic, some of the most tragic outcomes of it. And it was, Julie Kelly helped bring this to our attention too. She'll be joining us at 5:30 to discuss all of this. The awful U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves announcing his resignation today. Unfortunately, stays in the job until January 16th. We'll keep an eye on all of the breaking news. Other breaking news this weekend, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has passed away at the age of 100. That's right. He was born in 1924. We'll talk to Daniel Turner in just moments about Carter's legacy as we say goodbye to the former president. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 3:35 News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Joe Concha is here at 4 o'clock. John Lott joins us at 5 o'clock, and Julie Kelly at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. President Jimmy Carter has passed away at the age of 100. He's been in hospice care for well over a year in Plains, Georgia. The announcement being made by the Carter Center yesterday. Here's a bit of a flashback for you to 1979 as gas shortages were going on in the United States of America.
This is unreal. Isn't this disgusting? Why doesn't anybody contact the president? Why is he letting this happen to us?
To sum up in the word of one irate motorist, the first day of the odd-even system was a disaster. Gas lines at many stations were a lot longer than normal.
Line today is longer than it's ever been. I have no explanation for it.
This gas line at one station on the Upper West Side ran from 96th Street and West End Avenue all the way up to 102nd Street. As might be expected, the longer the line and waiting time, the angrier some motorists became.
I think it's terrible. I really think it's terrible. I'm in here for an hour already.
There's no shortage. I don't believe there's a shortage.
The odd-even system can't do anything about the problem of no gas. Some of the people online here have been in other lines and still don't have a tank of gas.
This is the second gas line this morning.
What happened at the first one?
They ran out.
I've been in 2 gas lines already.
This morning?
This morning.
How long did you wait for the first one?
I've been in both lines over an hour, and I'm out of gas. Dead out.
Weren't the accents so much better in 1979? There were so many good ones. Joining us now to discuss the Jimmy Carter era and the man's legacy is Daniel Turner. He's the founder and executive director of Power of the Future, and he joins us on the phone. Daniel, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Vince. Great to be with you.
Okay, so, Jimmy Carter, we started with energy for a reason, because energy really was one of the defining features of the Carter presidency, and unfortunately not in a good way.
Yeah, just like it is for the Biden administration, one of the defining issues. And look, I'm struggling a little bit with this because I want to be a good person. I want to be a good Christian. I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I'm not going to pretend he was a successful president. He was an absolute disaster. And he gave us an energy policy that almost bankrupted the country. I mean, we could talk about lots of things where he was a total failure, right? Selling the Panama Canal, the hostages who were held in Iran for 444 days. There's lots of things Jimmy Carter did that were absolutely abysmal. But energy was one where he truly shined, his absolute stupidity. And if you notice, his solution of OPEC trying to bankrupt America was license plates, right? If you have an odd number, you go on Tuesday. If you have an even number, you go on Wednesday. He had no vision to defeat OPEC. He had no vision to outproduce them. He had no vision to outmaneuver them. He just succumbed. And that's kind of like the beginning of maybe the Democrat Party's overall capitulation to our enemies, something that continued through the Clinton years, the Obama years, the Biden years, where when your enemies declare something, you say, well, that's just the way it is, guys. I guess we're going to have to follow. There's no sense of we can win because we're Americans and we're not going to tolerate this. So it's really just embarrassing that we're lionizing this man who was an absolute disaster. May he rest in peace. But thank God his energy policies are dead.
Yeah, one of the things, and I saw this coming a million miles away, in part because he was in hospice for as long as he was, in terms of what would the coverage be like in the wake of his passing. And it's as predictable as the sunrise, because you expect, okay, what are people going to talk about? They're going to talk about he donated a lot of his time in his post-presidency to Habitat for Humanity, and he didn't become filthy rich through corruption after his presidency. And the amazing thing is, like, we have such low standards for people in Washington, D.C., that's considered an amazing success. He's like the Michael Jordan of presidents because he wasn't filthy rich in his post-presidency.
It's a great point. The fact that he didn't break the law more. And, kudos, you built a couple houses for Haitians. That's great. Congratulations. We have a major housing crisis in America, and building free ones is not necessarily the solution. But all right, that's fine. You feel good about building some houses for poor people. Yay, Jimmy Carter. But the president's job is not to build houses for poor people, right? The president's job is to create the conditions so that we can thrive. It truly believes in freedom and the greatness of the American people. They don't need government to do things for them. They need government to set the conditions so that we can do things for ourselves. And Jimmy Carter did not believe that. And quite frankly, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't believe that. They believe government should be telling you what to eat, what to drive, what type of stove you should have, where you send your kid to school. Government is smarter than you.
Yes.
And your job is to just shut up and wear your mask if they tell you to, and do what they tell you. So
you listed off some of the tumultuous features of the Carter presidency. I just want to share a couple more, just as I'm reading out this list. The New York Post has an excellent piece up on it this morning, but it does remind me in a lot of ways of the Biden era. You've got the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan. You've got the Iranian hostage crisis, of course, and basically it seems to me that the international community throughout all of this smells an immense amount of weakness in the American government. You have the Mariel boat lift, where Fidel Castro it frees criminals and psychiatric patients on the island And people are jumping on boats and coming to the United States of America, which that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And then you've got the oil crisis with OPEC, which didn't take Carter seriously. And that led to all of these fuel shortages, lines, alternating plate days so you can fill up your car with gas. And then something we call stagnation, which is really kind of the worst of an economic situation where you have high inflation and high unemployment at the same time. And that doesn't have the makings of some, big successful presidency.
No, and then what he did with stagflation, which is very similar to what Biden-Harris did, especially Kamala Harris during the campaign, is he blamed the Americans. He said that you have a crisis of confidence. You don't believe in yourself. You don't believe. He yelled at the American people for the problem. And it's very similar to Kamala Harris and the Democrats saying the economy is great. What are you talking about, high inflation? Inflation is tame, even if it's transitory. Eggs aren't expensive. And if you did say, well, eggs and meat are expensive, they would say, but is that more expensive than abortion? So you were the one at fault for a lousy economy. You were the one at fault for pointing out the fact that things stink.
Well, you just reminded me, it was, and to confirm, I looked it up, 1977, Jimmy Carter gives a fireside chat where he tells Americans that rather than use energy in order to keep themselves warm at home, they should consider putting on a sweater. And it was called his sweater speech. He was wearing a cardigan sitting by a fire and telling people, hey, stop using up all this energy. We have shortages. Put a sweater on.
And at the height of that, it's because we were going through the radical climate change, although then it was global cooling. Right, this was the height of the next ice age is on its way, and it's all ushered in because of evil fossil fuels. Well, we have the exact opposite now. We have climate global warming because of fossil fuels, and it's the same conditions, right? It's the same. You're the ones at fault. This is all because of you, your behavior, and government's going to save you. Carter's energy policies set America back, but they also gave us Ronald Reagan and his energy policies. And I think Joe Biden will do the same. And when Americans get a taste again of inexpensive goods, inexpensive utility bills, inexpensive gas, hopefully this time it will cement in their heads, this is the way things should be on the regular. And anyone deviating from that is a threat to our liberty and freedom.
There's definitely things that a president can control, and creating favorable conditions for America's energy environment is absolutely one of them, as you and I have discussed so many times. The things that are a little bit outside their control, but definitely influenced by their existence, their policy, and their determination, is going to really go all the foreign stuff. What do world leaders do in the face of President Trump returning to office? And I am hopeful that basically our adversaries around the world and those people who are trying to go toe-to-toe with us have kind of a similar reaction to President Trump's rearrival as say the Iranians did when Ronald Reagan shows up in office and released the hostages immediately. That's the thing I'm looking forward to, and I'm very hopeful about. I'm praying about, and I hope it comes to pass. Daniel Turner, what do you think is going to happen?
100%. And that most of those hostages are still alive. And I would love to see any of them get asked about their impression of Jimmy Carter, because it was the day Reagan was inaugurated that they were released. And there were back channel conversations happening of the incoming and Reagan administration and the Ayatollah saying, you boys are going to want to do this sooner rather than later because it's going to get bad if you wait. And they obeyed. And I think that's what President Trump is doing right now with the still, 9 or 10 Americans being held hostage in Gaza for longer than 444 days. They're at 458 days, I believe. And so Biden has even surpassed Carter's abysmal handling of the hostage crisis, where fellow Americans are held against their will, and now they're waiting for Trump to rescue them. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get the exact same response, because evil always cowers before strength.
One of Carter's other legacies is still with us, other than the Panama Canal. It's interesting to watch as President Trump is looking to reverse what Jimmy Carter set in motion now and retake the Panama Canal after Jimmy Carter gave it away. But also the agencies. Jimmy Carter was responsible for creating the Department of Energy and the Department of Education And now we're still living with the long-lasting consequences of agencies that don't serve either of those issues very well, do they, Daniel?
No, and this is something for Elon and Vivek to address with Doge. You have tens of thousands of employees who don't educate and don't produce energy, but they do produce policy, right? They do push around papers. They do gum up the system, and they cost us billions and billions of dollars. And, you know, with all due offense to the thousands of bureaucrats, tens of thousands of bureaucrats in those agencies, what do you do all day, right? What happens at the Department of Energy, where we watched energy prices skyrocket the last 4 years? What happens at the Department of Education, where we see our kids becoming poorer and poorer educated every single year, and we dumb down standards? What do you do all day? How do you justify your existence? And so another lasting vestige of the Carter administration that I pray President Trump just completely annihilates, because they've just made us poorer and weaker and dumber.
Daniel Turner, obviously we have a lot of criticisms for the Carter era because they're instructive for the one we're living through now. That's why they're so useful to talk about. But one thing that I will say that I want to give him credit for in his post-presidency was in the early 2000s, he was a part of a commission to study the most effective voting laws. It was called the Carter-Baker Commission, done alongside former U.S. Secretary of State James Baker. And the two of them produced a pretty big and important report on how to secure the vote. And it includes like really obvious stuff: use paper ballots, use voter ID, all the things that we constantly talk about as the most effective way to secure and conduct an election. Carter was right about that. The left today, in all of their obituaries for Jimmy Carter, my guess is that detail will not come up in most of them, that he was for an election system you can actually believe in.
Maybe that should be the push of the right then, to say the best way to honor Jimmy Carter is to enact all of the reforms he suggested in the voting commission. Look, a broken clock is right twice a day. Kudos to Carter for pointing out the obvious, that it's best if you, like when you go to Costco, you show ID to walk in the door. Maybe we can vote with the same conditions, or renting a golf cart, etc. So, yeah, that would be a great way to honor the man, by having more secure elections. I have a feeling Joe Biden won't mention that in his eulogy. And boy, that's going to be something to behold.
Yes, it will. Speaking of an elderly president. Okay, thank you very much. Daniel Turner, good to have you today, sir. And again, Happy New Year.
Thanks.
All right, CNN processing the news today of Jimmy Carter's passing. They brought on a Democrat by the name of Kai Bird, who wrote a book about the, quote, unfinished presidency of Jimmy Carter. Oh, shoot, he never got to finish what he started. Here's how that went.
Oh, he felt terrible about losing that 1980 election to, a B-rate Hollywood movie actor named Ronald Reagan. It was unbelievable to him. But Carter was an unusual politician. He wasn't good on television. He was good in small circles of people at a dinner party, a small gathering of voters.
He wasn't good at speaking to large groups of people.
He could really connect with people. But he wasn't terribly good as a speaker on television, and Ronald Reagan, of course, was. But there's a more fundamental difference. I mean, Ronald Reagan was sunny about America, and Jimmy Carter was a truth teller. He was a Southern Baptist, born again.
America stinks.
Who, was troubled with the notion of America's exceptionalism. As a young man growing up in the Deep South in the midst of segregation, he could see America with all its warts. And he, as a Southerner, came from a heritage of defeat and occupation. So, he was too smart to be taken in by an entirely sunny view.
So he lacked optimism in the country. And by the way, that view, insofar as it's an accurate depiction of Carter's views, really, doesn't it permeate the entire left? Isn't that kind of their attitude about America? America sucks. Don't say it's great. Don't have hope for the future. Don't be optimistic about what we can do. Don't see decency and capability in her people. Emphasize what's bad. Emphasize what's broken. Dwell on it. Wallow in it. And that's not what people want to do. They don't. Americans don't. They have a higher regard for our country than this guy does, or Jimmy Carter apparently did. Coming up, we'll take your calls. We've got, speaking of presidencies, a lot like Jimmy Carter's, yet worse. Joe Biden has some regrets about his presidency, and they have nothing to do with how badly things have gone for you. That's ahead.